Footwear can be a very confusing space and can become even more confusing and even concerning when it comes to kids' footwear, because there's lots of different stories that we hear from whether it's footwear companies or practitioners or whatever about kids' feet and what they need or need potentially. So we've got Andy Bryan here, our head podiatrist, to help hopefully clarify and simplify the approach to kids' feet and kids' footwear. So where should we start?
It could be your auntie as well, or your grandmother that's saying your kids' feet are rolled in and then you should do something about it. And I think that's probably the most common thing I see in the clinic. People worried about their kids' foot shape because someone at the shoe store or the running coach or their grandmother or auntie has said, we should be looking at those feet because they're not the shape that we perceive to be the right shape. And so it's the same. I use this analogy that we all have noses, they're all different shapes, but we can mostly breathe and smell through our noses, and our feet are meant to be a different shape to the next person's feet as well. And especially with kids' feet, they are developing and changing shape all the time.
Your nose doesn't look the same as it looked when you were a baby.
That's true, yeah.
As far as I'm aware.
I would hope not.
So what is the difference then? So kids' feet don't, first of all, we know that there's some myths and misconceptions around the concept of flat feet generally, but when it comes to kids, we often do see, a flatter foot, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, is it?
Well, if we start when a child first starts walking, their foot is still not even bony. The bones haven't properly formed yet, and they've got a really large head compared to the rest of their body, and so they need a wider base of support, and they actually have a fatty pad in the arch. So we want to see a foot that is flat against the ground, really broad base of support, so they get as much feedback from the ground as to where they are in space, helping their sensory system, their balance system, their musculoskeletal system all develop. So it's normal, whatever normal is, to see a lower arch or no arch at all in that first walker for all those reasons. And then as time goes, arches change shape. But still, up until the age of 12, we might see that the arch is still quite low. And then some people will always have low arches, depending on their genetics and then the way they're using their feet as well. So we shouldn't say that there's this perfect or normal arch. There's all different shapes and sizes of feet.
Because I think that is the big story, and probably happens to countless kids where people see that the foot is flat. There's a story about flat feet. They see that the foot rolls in, and then it's like, well, they need support. And then the more you support it, the less it develops naturally, I assume.
For sure. When the foot is in this position or a lower arch, it's putting strain on the structures that will end up creating a strong foot. And so then those structures are still developing and react to that strain and get stronger. And
so the strain is actually a good thing.
The strain is a good thing, yeah. So we see a foot getting stronger because it's under strain. If we just support it, then that foot doesn't have to do the work, and then it's going to need support in the long term as well, possibly, yeah.
Yeah, it'd be similar to seeing a child with, maybe poor spinal control and thinking, oh, well, we need to help their spinal control, let's put them in a back brace for long periods of time during the day, and then look later and go, oh, well, now their back still doesn't have good control, and it's probably because you just didn't let them naturally develop through all of the ranges of movements and build strength through those ranges because they'd been in a stiff, supportive brace.
Exactly. And so there's this cultural norm of a foot having this perfect arch and heels being straight. And so we need to move away from that and understand that some kids' feet will have lower arches and their heels will tip in. It's more about how they move and whether there's any symptoms associated with their feet. And there rarely are with most kids' feet. It's not a lot to do with the shape of their feet at all.
Because you have people coming in for you to assess their child's feet, not necessarily in the presence of pain or symptoms. Hey, it's just, oh, I've seen this happening with their foot, so something's wrong. Do we need orthotics or do we need a specific kind of footwear?
That would be the most common thing that I see kids for because of that concern from a parent or a shoe store or something like that. And the assessment I take the child through is running, jumping, squatting, skipping, doing all these human movements, and the parents are often a bit amazed at how able their child is and that their feet aren't giving them any issues. And then I can show the parents that the arch is moving, that we see it in a lower position, then we see it in a higher position, and their body moving is changing that arch, and that's what's most important. Yeah.
And I think that's a really key point, that there may be times where children or young adults need more support in the case of a specific pain or injury, and usually that would be a short-term thing. But as a general rule, it's not something that is needed across the whole population. I think that's really, really key. And it's interesting too, I know that the recommendations for babies' shoes start off more or less like natural footwear, barefoot footwear. Wide, flat, thin, flexible, all of these things to allow the foot to develop naturally. So then what is the story with why that changes into the common school shoes, for example, with a stiff heel counter and a rigid body and all of that?
Well, even before that, once the child turns 3, we see them wearing little mainstream running shoes that have got stiff in the back and only flexing here, and they're not wide enough through the toes.
And some cushioning usually as well.
Lots of cushioning, because suddenly the story changes that the foot needs support, needs cushioning, and really it should never need to change that story. People's feet adapt to wearing less shoes throughout their life, and so if a child has started in natural footwear, then they don't need to transition into natural footwear. They've always been there, and that process is easy. There's no benefit to putting a child at 3 or 4 into the heeled cushion stiff shoe.
Except for very specific rare conditions.
Yeah, rare conditions. Yeah.
And so let's say a child has, they've gone through that typical process of starting as a baby in the fully natural baby footwear, allowing all this natural development. They get to 3 or 4, they're walking around more, running around more, and they've shifted to more conventional footwear, like with all those characteristics that we mentioned that actually disrupt natural foot function. And maybe they've been in that for a number of years, depending on their age. Is there considerations that we have to have for them going back into a shoe that is more natural or allows more of that natural function?
Kids are developing so quickly and changing so quickly, and their habits are so variable in terms of their movement, that it's a really easy transition out of that conventional footwear into more natural footwear. That you still might not have them going to do their sport in it straight away, but definitely for day-to-day life, they could, in most situations, go straight into a minimalist footwear and not even notice a big difference apart from the benefits. They just feel good that their shoes are nice and light and they can move naturally. And so that's maybe around 5 or 6. It's easy, even up to 10 to 12 years of age. I think it's still an easy transition for day-to-day life. In athletic endeavours, if they're used to a footy boot or a running shoe for a chosen activity, then it might be a slower transition. But definitely for day-to-day life, it's an easy transition for most children.
And potentially in certain sporting situations, you're not going to shift to a completely natural shoe necessarily. Really depends on the context, I imagine. But probably all the principles hold true of, starting relatively small, building gradually, listening to the signs from the body. But in general, it's going to be quite a quick process compared to an adult who's been wearing conventional footwear for decades.
That's disrupted their natural function.
Yeah.
And that has been only a short period of disruption for a child, so it's easier for them to go back, and they're still developing. And I like this idea of watching a bunch of kids running up and down a basketball court in their big cushion stiff shoes. And if you've ever been to one of these stadiums, it's like a herd of elephants running up and down the basketball court. And then you might see those same kids running up and down the edge of a swimming pool on concrete that afternoon, and their technique is very different. They're very light on their feet. And so the shoe really does disrupt their natural function. When they're running on a hard, flat surface, they're immediately changing their technique and the way they move. Whereas when they're in their cushioned shoe, that changes it as well. So there's a quick changeover at that age. Whereas if you put an adult in that's used to a heavily cushioned shoe into less shoe and get them to run on a hard surface, that change doesn't often happen so quickly or as easily and without damage, like kids just adapt so quickly.
Generally, I think kids have more movement options available to them. They've had less time to restrict those movement options by disuse basically. And so, if you think about babies, they've got too many movement options generally. They have to sort of prune those away and make their movements more coordinated and build stability in certain movements. But a child, generally, you'll see, has a lot more freedom of movement than most adults these days, which means like they can self-organize their technique depending on the situation and the environment. But we often prescribe exercises, I guess, for an adult, for example, doing big toe extension movements or rolling the bottom of the foot out, sort of restorative exercises to account for that lack of mobility or function. What do you do for kids if they come in, or what would you recommend that kids do if they're wanting to maybe accelerate their transition towards a more natural footwear, or just to optimize their natural foot function? Because kids aren't necessarily moving in all of the natural ways that they did maybe 50, 100, 1,000 years ago.
For sure. And even if I have a child come to see me that has pain or a symptom to do with their feet, I'm not putting them in a supportive heeled cushion shoe or orthotics straight away. I'm assessing to see how they're moving and see if there's some deficit in that. But with children to do exercises, it becomes quite a strain between the parents and the child, and it's hard for rehab for a child to be motivated to do rehab. And so really, this is where we step into habitual changes. So that could be looking at exercises or sports or activities that are encouraging varied ranges of motion, varied movement. So if they're really into their running, maybe athletics or something, then I might suggest that they look into, say, a martial art or some dancing or climbing or something that exposes their body to all those different movements, because then you're naturally getting that input of different stimulus to change the way the foot and the body's moving. And then if we are going to do some rehab, we have to make it fun and playful so that there's some buy-in for the children. And so this is where we have them doing our playful balance games and things like that. And you can see their eyes light up. You can see that it's going to be done. It can be done with the parents. They're going to benefit from it as well. And that's a far more sustainable way of approaching management of a condition if we're going to need to put something in place to help them into shoes like this, or just to help them be symptom-free.
Yeah. Awesome. So to summarize, kids' feet are constantly developing, as are adults' feet, and to foster the most natural development, it's important to have natural footwear. They transition easily, generally much more easily than adults, from conventional footwear to natural footwear. And to boost the process, find activities that are fun, engaging, maybe an element of friendly competition in there, either with their friends or with you as a parent, and just listen to the body signals along the way and check in with how it's going. Generally, like you've said, I think it can be very smooth and painless with just those few simple tips. Anything to add to that to finish up?
Just to get away from this idea of a normal foot and everything having to look perfect. Our feet are meant to be different from one to the next, and as long as they can move well, then we don't usually have any worries.
Yeah, perfect.